So as we move from the Jeremiah Smith hype to the quarterback hype, I think I realize what's going on in Columbus because I have now seen one Devin Brown's presser earlier this week got an insane amount of love for what a guy he is. You know, obviously he's talked multiple times about how he's here to compete. He's not going anywhere. We'll see on March 15th we'll see on April 15th whether that's real or not because the portal will open up for a second time there. But and listen, I'm not anti Devin Brown. I'm anti media creations. And I've heard enough about his press conferences. I've heard enough about his arm strength, which everyone that watched him at practice says he's got the best arm. And I will say I did not see that in any of the times that he threw the ball this year or like in like that game where he played pretty much the full game. I did not see this alleged arm strength, but I'm willing to say this is a media creation. I officially have moved to the Columbus media, the Buckeyes media is trying too hard to make this a thing. I do not think it's a thing. I think this is a media creation, and I think they're trying too hard to sell Devin Brown as the great white hope.
I think that's probably fair. I'll tell you what I think is kind of going on is I think that it's all and I don't know like if the media is purposely doing this, but I think that Ohio State is almost doing Devin Brown a solid where they're like, hey, we're going to say it's a quarterback competition and let you try to earn it. And if you don't, we're going to talk you up so much and make sure the media talks you up so much that if you want to transfer, there will be an opportunity for you to go somewhere and some team will feel like they have a really good quarterback coming in because, well, at Ohio State, he was doing some really good things this spring. That's kind of what it feels like is happening. Like they're doing their best Devin Brown sales pitch. And that goes back to what I said, earlier in the offseason. I want to say back in like February during Combine Week or whatever it was when I was solo. That I think it's great that Devin Brown's saying all the right things right now, and that he's talking about this competition and he's open to it, and he's not just going to run and hide because he doesn't get handed the job. Which I also think was kind of, in some ways, I almost think it was almost a shot at Kyle McCord too. Like, yeah, I'm not chicken shit. I'm sticking around and I'm going to actually try to duke this thing out because that's just who I am. But like I commend him for that. But I also said in that episode, like if he were to decide at any point after spring, after next season, whatever, that he was going to transfer because he wanted a chance to start somewhere, I also wouldn't blame him for that. So, credit to him for sticking it out. But I don't necessarily think it's if he does transfer, it doesn't make him like any lesser of a Buckeye or person or whatever. Like this is a log jam quarterback room, and we'll see. I also think it's interesting how the transfer portal coming up on April 15th, once it opens after the spring game, it is going to be interesting to see if, again, there's a lot of scuttlebutt that there's going to be a lot of maybe moves happening and some surprise things happening. And if that's the case,
just to be clear, that's not necessarily just for Ohio State.
Right. Right.
That is like a countrywide thing. And it has kind of been tipped off by Kadyn Proctor, who you and I salivated over for a month in the transfer portal, who went from Alabama to Iowa only to take $100,000 in cash and then go right back to Iowa.
Yeah.
Right back to Alabama. So,
which I know we're going to get into in a second, but I was just going to say and I don't know if this is going to happen, but maybe the logjam at quarterback starts to sort itself out at Ohio State during that period. Like if Julian Sain's like, yeah, it was fun to compete, but if he gets the sense that maybe he's not going to be the starter even next year because they really like Aaron Noland or something, maybe he decides to transfer. So I don't know. We'll see how this all sorts itself out, but I wouldn't be surprised if this just becomes almost like a, hey, let's give Devin Brown some good PR so that if he decides to transfer, he can land somewhere else and be a starter.
Now, we should get into the Kadyn Proctor thing because it has tentacles that do reach to Ohio State. Listen, there's a part of me that thinks it's very funny that there is no legal obligation for this kid to pay back the money. And the idea that, and like, I understand why people are frustrated, and I don't think it's great. I think it's unethical if Kadyn Proctor went to Iowa without without really wanting to go to Iowa. If he just went to take the money and go back to Alabama, it is unethical at best, and it is just it should be illegal. It's not right. Is what is the best way to put it. Um, Without knowing the full details, it is funny. Because how many times have we seen administrators, faculty, football coaches, like the whole machine is rigged for their financial benefit. Even the buyout system, where the school you're going to is going to pay out your buyout, so it's basically just money laundering. If this becomes widespread, and we're going to find out in the portal coming up on the 15th, fair point here. If this becomes widespread, it is going to, and this would be my word of caution to college football players. If you abuse this system, some people feel you're abusing the system just by going into the portal every single year. But if you abuse this system by taking money and then leaving before you ever play for a down for that school, you will absolutely hasten change in college football or college basketball, and it will be to the detriment of student athletes.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, here's the thing: college administrators don't need too many Kadyn Proctors to come down and reinstitute the era of tyranny that they had for the first 120 years, or well, with the NCAA, it was really like a 75-year thing. They do not need any more examples. So I would just say, and here's the thing: it's always going to be the bad faith actors in this scenario with players, because coaches, administrators, they're just looking for this crap under a rock. So the isolated incident, I'm willing to chalk it up to it's unethical, but on some level, it's slightly comical. I would just really advise players against doing stuff like this, because this is the kind of stuff that is going to get everybody united, and it will not end up with more freedom for players. It'll end up more close to the indentured servitude that you had previously.
You're 100% right. I do think there's a comical side of this, because, and let's face it, like I'm never going to sit here and do the woe is me for these billionaires and millionaires who are often donating to these collectives and, trying to help fund these programs. But I do think about it from a standpoint of like Ohio State, and yeah, it's as a fan, like it is somewhat frustrating for a kid to come just take the money that you could have used on somebody else who actually would come and want to play here. Because, some kids just taking it and running. And this kind of already has been hinted at potentially happening to Ohio State with the Quinn Ewers situation. People said he basically did the same thing, came, signed his contract for NIL, took the money, went back to Texas.
He at least
he stuck it out for the year,
campus and stuck it out for the year.
That's true. That's true.
This is not great.
Yeah. And so I think on some level, I'm not going to cry over spilled milk, and there is a comedic value to it. Although I do think with these collectives, you have seen some people who have given to these who aren't like your 1%ers at a university. Like there are people who are just fans of the team who they make a decent living, and they're like, hey, you know what? I want to help fund the program, so here's $1,000. So I do think there's the trickle down effect of that is people all around who are donating to these collectives and helping fund these things do feel like on some level they're robbed. And I do think, to your point, it's just going to speed up the process. Nobody likes feeling like their money was just absolutely stolen from them and that it wasn't used in good faith. So that's going to speed up the process of them trying to regulate this. And yeah, you're right. It's going to be at a detriment to the players. I'll also say, I almost think this is where the current setup of the NIL within the NCAA rules is basically it is coming back to bite right now the universities and the collectives themselves, because you're not allowed to do the pay for play. It's not okay, if you start this many games, you get X amount of money, or if it's, if you stick it out there, or it's not set up like the NFL where a guy signs a contract and he gets the money hits his paycheck. Now there's a signing bonus figure that he gets when he signs, but because he's under contract, the base salary payments come as they play a game, right? They get those each Tuesday of the week that follows or whatever the hell it is. So it's not set up that way. If you were allowed to do it that way, if you were allowed to do a pay for play type thing where it was okay, you play 10 games, you see the full amount of this contract or this deal this NIL deal we're giving you, then it actually happens. Now that also is a detriment to the players because they might not see that many games, but that's where
I think real quick, I think instead of per game, I think what you do is it's like every 2 weeks if you're enrolled. It's like a normal
yeah,
job, meaning, all right, you are still going to practice, you're still doing all this stuff. Here's your every 2 week pay. Like, I mean,
that's fair.
I think
That's a good way to do it.
okay. Here's a signing bonus. Here's your weekly allotment. Here's your this. But I think the problem is even in this system, like I think we're putting it all on Kadyn Proctor. How do we know some Southern dandy didn't like go up to Kadyn and give him the Godfather offer? Like, granted, we are putting on the player unethical, on this, on that. How do we know the second this kid didn't land in Iowa that there are guys from Alabama in his DMs and chasing him financially, saying, "Hey, man, I'll give you $5 million to come back to Alabama. Or I'll give you $1 million to come back to Alabama." I think that's the other part of this that like it's pushing towards like we got to get these guys under contract. I don't think that ends up being good for players either. But again, I think I think that's where teams are gonna want to go, simply because that's going to be an avenue to control the flow of funds, and hopefully now all of a sudden it's going to be the Kadyn Proctor thing. But we don't want a Kadyn Proctor here. This will be but just as you were talking about, I was thinking about how like we don't know what calls Kadyn was getting during all this, and I think that's what ends up making me uncomfortable with what this is going to be used as is some sort of clarion call to these these hyperbolic monsters of chaos who all they really want is their control back.
Yeah, well, and we've talked about that a lot. Like, just the control factor is the big element here. It's why Nick Saban says, "I'm out. I don't want to be part of this," because he's losing control. The schools are losing control with the NIL stuff, and all that matters. It's and I want to be clear, like, I don't think either of us have like all the answers to this, like, because on some level, you're right. Like, there probably is going to be some sort of regulation, whether it's what you propose, where it's like a weekly thing or 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, like, okay, here's your next payment, whatever, as long as you're enrolled. And that doesn't help the players because you want them to maximize the amount of money they can get. And neither does like the pay per play, pay by game type scenario, because then again you might not see some of that money, so that doesn't help them. But there does, I do think on some level, like, there has to be a happy medium, because these collectives and things aren't just going to let people get away with this. I do think Kadyn Proctor is going to end up being the example, though, to your point. Like, this is now going to be the inflection point where if other people do this, it's going to be, well, he pulled a Kadyn Proctor, and that's just what it's going to be, unless he gives the money back, which I doubt he's going to do. And then it would be, okay, just in good faith. But yeah, I wondered as well, like you did, what this means for that very fast-paced changing landscape of the NIL era and how these programs do business. Now, I think what's also interesting about this, I know this is where we kind of wanted to go next, was that another Alabama transfer that came to Ohio State is Caleb Downs, has also been rumored all throughout the week to potentially be pulling a Kadyn Proctor and also going back to Alabama at some point here in the spring.
Well, let's be honest. The rumor started because he removed Ohio State football from his social media handle.
Yeah.
So it is we're basically profile watching again, and we haven't even made it to December again. So I guess this is just what we're going to be doing in college athletics. I want to hold that for the next segment,
okay,
because it ties into the Michigan Panic Meter, and I also have to answer your charge last week on the Michigan Panic Meter. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.